When Christians think about demons, they typically think of possession, okay, or these narratives in the Gospels where Jesus delivers someone from a demonic possession, someone who's seized by a supernatural power. But there's a lot more to the story and the backstory than that. Sort of creeping suspicion or creeping narrative that says, well, we really don't believe in these things. Those possession accounts in the Gospels, those are really just psychological conditions and other health problems. And it's like, okay, there are a couple that, could go either way with that. But, Jesus doesn't command a brain or, abnormality to go into a herd of pigs over the edge, into the sea. They're just narratives that don't fit that. When it comes to the spiritual world, we are forced to use the language of our own experience, things we can process, distance, time, space. And the biblical writers are doing it because, guess what? They're using words that they know and their audience knows. So they're taking things from their world, vocabulary, metaphors, and they're using those things to describe the indescribable.
Understanding Genesis 1 and the concept of the cosmos that it's trying to invite us into is crucial. Actually, none of the biblical story will make sense if you don't understand the shape of the cosmos that's laid out in Genesis 1. First off, Genesis 1 is actually not Genesis 1. It's Genesis 1, verse 1 to 2, verse 3. And just on page 1, our medieval scholars botched the literary units. And so it's kind of unfortunate. So, but it's not that big of a deal because you can still see that the author has repeated all of the words of the opening lines of Genesis 1, and repeated them in the closing lines of Genesis 2, verses 1 through 3. If you do a comparison, it's like a bookend around the 6 days that are in the middle of the two bookends. So what's important for understanding the spiritual realm is, Genesis 1 opens with darkness and wilderness, wild and waste. And then these waters, these dark waters. And we won't get into all of the debates that unfold from there. But what happens, that everybody agrees on, is God speaks over a series of 7 days. He speaks 10 times over the course of 7 days. And the first 6 days, their literary design is really important. The first thing that God does is do 3 acts of separating that take the darkness and the waters and to begin to split them into ordered realms. So he splits light from dark, the waters from the waters, and then the land from the waters as the dry land emerges. That's days 1, 2, and 3. And so what happens, days 1 through 3 is about God creating these realms. So you have the realm of time, or the order of time, which we don't think of as a place, but it's different for the biblical authors. Day 2 is about those waters, those dark waters get split in half. And this is a very common ancient Near Eastern creation motif that the biblical author is developing and actually kind of polemicizing, doing a little trash talk against. But that's a whole other conversation.
Oh, yeah.
But the splitting of the waters is something that God does without any effort, just with his word. Whereas Marduk, the patron god of Babylon, he almost died trying to split the waters, and he was barely able to do it with all of his strength. Anyhow, so but what that gives you is the waters below and the waters above, which are called, the waters above are called sky. And then you get, on day 3, you get the land. That's days 1 through 3. So what happens on days 4, 5, and 6 is that you now have these 3 realms. You have the waters above, you have the sky, then you have the land, and then the waters below. It's a 3-tiered cosmos. And what happens on days 4, 5, and 6 is the order returns, and God begins to fill each of those unique realms with inhabitants. So he places inhabitants in the skies. They're called lamps. In Hebrew, it's the word ma'or. It's the same word used for the lamp in the tabernacle. Places the lamps up in the sky. And it never uses the word sun or moon. It just uses the words big lamp and small lamp. And then also the stars. The stars just get a passing mention. Take a big lamp, little lamp. And the big lamp rules over the day, and the little lamp rules over the night. Okay, that's important. So they're up there, and the thing that God was doing, separating day and night, which God did on day one, he gives that responsibility now over to these lamps. He says they are the ones who are now going to separate day and night. Day 5, God put sky flyers who fly against the waters above, and then the water swarmers who swim in the waters beneath. And then day 6, you get the land. So you can just see you're just systematically working through the 3 tiers of the cosmos. And on land, there's two sets of creatures. There's the land creatures and beasts and crawlers and so on. And then the last kind of pinnacle creature is humans, who are God's image. And God tells them to rule as his image on the land. So notice that symmetry between the inhabitants in the skies above, who rule over day and night, and then there's the land dwellers who rule over the land. Do you see that? So that's an important pairing or symmetry. There's the rulers above, and there's the rulers below. Genesis 1 is using vertical spatial language to talk about these 2 parallel realms, right? Heaven, the heavens above. And that's going to continue right out throughout the biblical story. However, the biblical authors are going to go on to nuance and show that heaven and earth, even though there's the spatial words like up and down, the biblical authors have a way more sophisticated view of these 2 parallel realms, because heaven and earth can overlap in the same exact space, like in Jacob's dream, where he wakes up, where he has this vision or dream, and he sees heaven and earth are connected by this stairway ramp, and he sees the host of heaven going up and down, traffic between heaven and earth. So the temples, high places, mountains, Eden, these are all places where heaven and earth are the same thing, the same place. And so earthly characters can encounter heaven and its inhabitants right here on earth.
Come travel with me back to a very significant moment in the course of this ministry. Many know this channel went on a pilgrimage of sorts across the country to Portland, where we met Tim Mackie and even toured the Bible Project studios. It was such an epic Bible nerd moment. The main reason I was there was for a Hebrew Bible conference and to interview one of the great biblical educators of our day, Ray Lubeck. Ray Lubeck is a special human being. Ray is an author and educator that has produced a large number of incredible biblical scholars and minds like Tim Mackie, Andrew Teeter, Carissa Quinn, Dr. Carmen Imes. This Hebrew Bible conference was mind-blowing and paradigm-shattering for me. It was a foundational moment for my life and this ministry. We recently have gone back through the teachings and are actually in production of a series releasing my personal experience and some edits of my favorite teachings from this incredible Hebrew Bible conference. Welcome to another episode of Ring Them Bells, where we exist to help you rediscover the supernatural focus of your Bible. We believe this supernatural focus has been suppressed, and we're here to bring that back into the light. While I was at this conference, one of the most amazing talks that I saw was from a professor, Dr. Andrew Teeter. This talk was going over the connection between the seen and unseen realm, between heaven and earth, and how he showed that is actually of the literary structure of Genesis 1. Now, in our Bibles, we see our interpreted Genesis 1 as it's laid out in structure, but in Hebrew, the actual literary structure of Genesis 1, Teeter shows us, can give us a lot of insights into the biblical author's worldview. Dr. Michael Heiser's work was featured and referenced throughout this Bible nerd mind-numbing talk. Dr. Teeter is fast and furious, and he only had a small window of time to get out a large amount of information. I'm going to be slowing this teaching down with some insights of my own along the way. We've got an amazing series going over this Hebrew Bible conference. We're going to have talks from Tim Mackie, Carmen Imes, Ray Lubeck himself. Buckle up and get ready for one of the most amazing talks that you will ever hear, going over the literary genius of the Hebrew Bible and how it points us to the supernatural connection of the seen and unseen realms.
Dr. Teeter completed his undergraduate degree here at Multnomah University in 2000. He went on to earn his MA at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and his PhD at the University of Notre Dame. Dr. Teeter has served as a faculty professor of Hebrew Bible at Harvard Divinity School since 2008. He specializes in the literature and religious thought of the Hebrew Bible, understood within the historical context of its formation and its interpretive reception within the Second Temple Judaism. His courses cover a range of topics in literature, history, and theology of the Hebrew Bible, with attention to the history of interpretation, both ancient and modern. Presentation today is entitled The World Seen: Structure, Worldview, and the Poetics of Genesis 1. Would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew Teeter?
Just a heads up here, there is a lot to cover in a very short period of time, and there's really nothing else for it but to go very fast. So buckle up, and here we go. My remarks this morning are going to be focused on the intersection between two foundational insights that I learned from my classes with Ray Lubeck back in the 90s. These are but two among the many profound, life-changing, transformative perspectives that I, and no doubt a great many in this room, have learned from him, whether directly or indirectly from his students. So in particular, what I'm going to try and consider within the brief time we have this morning is how the structure and poetics of Genesis 1 embody a worldview. What I'm interested in exploring together today is what sumerologist Piotr Mikołowski speaks of as, quote, the manner in which a worldview is rendered tangible within a text. That is to say, the principled ways in which a worldview, elements of poetic structure can embody, engender, cultivate, or inculcate a worldview, a way of seeing, thinking about, and experiencing the world. So as we're going to see, the literary structure of this text of Genesis 1 is designed in such a manner as to disclose its truth claims about the world from multiple, distinct, but complementary angles, vantage points, and apertures. The world seen within Genesis 1, the world as seen there, is a world seen multiply, in a manifold manner. So my claim is that attending to this multiplicity of perspectives is key to understanding the vision of the world that this text embodies, the worldview that it renders tangible.
First and foremost, we should be wowed by Teeter's credentials. Not only did he learn with Tim Mackie from Ray Lubeck at Multnomah University, but then he went on to get his PhD at Notre Dame and now has taught Hebrew Bible at Harvard since 2008. This is a reason for us to pay attention and listen to what he has to say. His strengths are taking the Hebrew Bible's designed literary structure and how it has context and connection to the cultural surroundings of the ancient Near Eastern world of the Hebrew authors. With a focus on Second Temple literature, Teeter shows us how the actual literary structure of the text shows the way that the authors and audience viewed their seen world intimately connected with the unseen realm. Teeter is super smart and super fast, so again, I'm going to slow things down for us, interject some thoughts for discussion, and allow us to digest this amazing teaching together. Here we go.
One way to think about the structure of Genesis 1 from the top level is as a tripartite composition with an introduction, 6 days of creation, and then a conclusion. Now, these three units all have a complex internal structure. So let's look first at the central panel. Here there is a 6-part division created by the identical opening and closing of each day on days 1 through 6. And God said, and it was evening, and it was morning, day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? The days are treated in consecutive linear order, obviously, and this strict pattern is absent in the opening and the closing panels, the introduction and the conclusion, even though the closing panel constitutes day 7. This 6-part block of consecutive days is, as widely recognized, subdivided into 2 sets of 3 by a variety of internal features of content and language. The first set of days pertains to the ordering of time and place, and the second set of days concerns the creation of living creatures to inhabit those places. Each set represents a progressive 3+1 movement. So in both sets of days, the third day is longer than the rest, containing an extra bonus act in both the first and the second set of days concerning plants, fruit trees, etc. So thus we have two panels that are both structured as progressive 3 plus 1 structure. 1, 2, 3 plus 1, 1, 2, 3 plus 1 here. So as I said, we're going to go fast. The two sets are parallel to each other, being mapped onto one another by a variety of features, as you see here. And this, again, as widely recognized, follows a pattern in which the days map onto one another. Let there be light, let there be luminaries, and so forth. So each day maps. Again, I won't cover this because this is widely recognized within the literature, but the first set of days concerns forming, the second set of days concerns filling. Now, a recursion of this pattern also obtains in both cycles of days, that it obtains in both cycles of days also obtains on the next level up on the structural hierarchy when they're taken together, including the seventh day. Again, 1, 2, 3 plus 1, culminating in the provision of plants. This is the term Esav in Hebrew. And then a 1, 2, 3 plus 1, again Esav. And this occurs on the larger level as a 1, 2, 3 plus 1, ending in the seventh day. Now the term 7 and the term Esav are both anagrams of one another, the same set of letters. Okay? So the 7 days of the chapter are thus arranged as two climactic 3 plus 1 sequences that themselves recursively combine into a higher level 3 plus 1 sequence, again, culminating in the blessing of the seventh day. Now, again, this is widely recognized.
Okay, so it was at this point of the talk that smoke started to come out of my ears from my brain working too hard. So let's slow this down and digest together what Teeter just said. First, just understanding the complex literary structure lets us know the genius of the Hebrew scriptures, the authors, obviously God breathed, but put throughout the entire text, not just in Genesis 1, but followed throughout the entire Tanakh, is something to just be in awe of. But I want to start with the fact of how Teeter wanted to really drive home the fact that this 3 plus 1 structure of Genesis 1 is well accepted and widely recognized. He's teaching us this first accepted point so that he can build upon it like a foundation. Another point that I want to bring to the surface is how all of this, seeing the original structure of the language, even how the words map on top of each other, really only comes out and is apparent through the original languages. That's why I always say, if you don't want to learn Hebrew or Greek, you want to make sure that you find a trustworthy teacher who has those ancient languages mastered, because they really do help bring out a whole depth and context of the culture, even in just the literary structure, the shapes of the words. It's incredibly beautiful and amazing. Teeter just showed that the structure of the creation text laid out in Genesis 1 is mapped onto itself, showing an interconnectedness in literary design. Again, Teeter emphasized that this point is widely accepted, and this is a foundational point that he's going to build on to show that this 3 plus 1 structure of the creation account in Genesis 1 is widely accepted, how it maps onto each other and the structure that's already there. Next, we follow Teeter into the unseen world and how the literary structure of Genesis 1 shows how our two worlds are intimately woven together. Put your thinking caps on and get ready to enter the unseen realm with a biblical genius.
Less widely recognized is the following. So besides this linear progression, each set of days also contains a pattern distribution of features designed to support an alternative and complementary structural principle, that of inverse symmetrical correspondence. So if we're looking at the first 3 days, it opens and closes with the provision of light and the provision of seed. The statement, God saw that it was good, and God saw that it was good. The statement, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the statement, God called the dry ground land, and the gathering of waters he called seas. And then in the final line of day 1, you have a feature that has always puzzled commentators. Why is it that the first day does not use the ordinal, rishon, but the cardinal, echad, yom echad, day 1? Okay? That is given an answer to some degree when one looks at the first line of the third day, which says, Yikavu hamayim mitachat hashemayim el makom echad, one place, yom echad, makom echad. So all these kind of line up in a pattern distribution. Same thing happens with the days 4 through 6. Again, beginning with lights and ending with seed, moving on to the two rulers which are made, the larger and the smaller, these rulers in the sky plate serve to do what God does on day one. God distinguishes between light and darkness, and then the luminaries will distinguish between the light and darkness, and they're to rule. This is followed then by the stars. Moving over to day 6, it begins with the creation of the land animals, and then the two rulers, male and female. And these rulers rulers on the land, are created, as it says here, in God's image and God's likeness. Now, while the term for rule differs in both, mashal for the heavenly or celestial bodies, and kavash or rada in the case of man and woman, the term that is focused on is the image of God. And as you can see here, the term for rule and the term for image are both more or less anagrams of one another. Mem, shin, lamed, and the sibilant sade, lamed, mem. Okay, so tselem and mashal. So again, focusing on what's above and what's below. So to flip the axis here, you can see that you have what's above and what's below and what's above and what's below, all with an ordered pattern of features on either side. Again, complementary with this progressive structure that we looked at. Now, again, recall that the double cycles of days are introduced and concluded with a parallel segment parallel segments that form an envelope or an inclusio around the whole. So the introduction anticipates the double pattern of day cycles in days 1 through 6, with the notification that the land was uninhabitable and empty, tohu vavohu, and the uninhabitable waste is first made habitable in the initial 3 days, and then its emptiness is filled in the second set of 3 days. And then going to the conclusion, it begins with the statement that the skies and the land and all their hosts were completed. The first series of days depicts the completion of the skies and the land. The second series of days depicts the completion of the hosts of heaven and the hosts of earth.
Okay, so this is another important part for us to pause, slow things down, and let our brains catch up with Teeter's teaching. Aren't our Bibles absolutely fascinating? I'm in awe of the wonder and literary structure as I learn from people like this. I'm not a scholar. I don't have any of this down packed, but I can tell you that as I learn these things, it just draws me into more wonder and love for God and the narrative that's revealed in Scripture. Again, we can see after this last clip how knowing these original languages, seeing the structures, how the words can be mapped on top of each other really helps bring a lot of context to understanding what the intended original author's point was for his audience to understand. So in this last clip, Teeter progressed from showing us the linear literary structure of Genesis 1 to showing us how even within the text horizontally we can see the connection between what is above and what is below. This literary structure reveals the worldview of the ancient authors and shows how they viewed these two worlds interconnected and intimately woven together. The literary structure definitely draws out a connection between the rulers of the sky and the rulers of the earth. We have us as humans, we're given dominion and rule over this earth, and then in the Hebrew author mind, when they looked up and saw planets, they viewed those as spiritual beings. In Genesis 1, when God appoints these sky rulers, those are the rulers of the sky, set into contrast of the rulers of the earth, us humans given dominion. And we need to keep that in mind because that's the foundation for so much of what we see go wrong in the 3 rebellions. God gives dominion and rule for spiritual beings in their realm, and for human beings in our realm. And both of us try to distort that and go beyond what God has deemed where we fit. I think it's important to note the setup that we have here. We know very soon in the narrative that both the sky rulers and the earth rulers are going to mix and mingle in a way that God did not ordain. Here we have God setting the standard before you see the deviation. The ordered literary pattern that Teeter presents shows a designed structure from God for the connection of the heavens and earth. We can see this in focus in Jesus' prayer as he starts and teaches us to pray, "Our Father in heaven," and then even continues on to let us know to pray for God's kingdom to come here on earth as it is in heaven. that interconnectedness is woven throughout the entire narrative of Scripture.
So, returning to our initial query then, we're now in a position to consider whether and how these multiple recursive structures or structural patterns relate to worldview. In the inverse symmetrical pattern in Genesis 1, we've seen that these serve to bring into relational comparison not only what is temporally before and what is after, but also what is spatially above and below in terms of an overall world picture. This doubled three-tiered schematic world model is one that is characterized by a symmetrical relationship between the celestial and terrestrial spheres. But there's no indication that the model itself is spherical. Now, while no ancient visual depiction of the world model of Genesis 1 is extant, one finds no shortage of attempts to reconstruct such, whether popular depictions, old and new, or more academic efforts to emulate the iconographic style and conventions of ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, as you see or may see up there. Now, given the undeniable and manifest relationships between the literature and thought of the Hebrew Bible and that of the surrounding ancient Near Eastern cultures, this is an eminently understandable undertaking. Now, it seems to me that that most of these attempts, at any rate, have been led astray by comparative iconography in relationship to the notion of a dome or firmament in Genesis 1. Here, as you see up there, on the other hand, is an alternative representation of the schematic world model, which, while admittedly leaving much to be desired artistically, comes closer, I would argue, to capturing conceptually the relationship between, or the relationships brought to expression through the structure and language of Genesis 1 itself, the overall gestalt. Here, a structured comparison is established between two rulers above and two rulers below. This is, in both cases, divinely delegated rulership in which the created beings continue the work of God. The very things that God does in the first sequence of days are maintained through delegates in the second set, an imitatio Dei, on the celestial and terrestrial planes. Here, the plate, the rakia, and its face corresponds to, it matches the face of the land. But what is one supposed to be thinking of in terms of this plate? You saw it's often seen as a dome or a kind of snow globe. The term rakia is derived from a verb, raka, that elsewhere means, among other things, to stamp, to pound out, to beat firmly. So, for example, it's used of the silver used for plating idols in Jeremiah 10. It's a silver beaten flat, kesef meruka. Now, this conveys really nothing necessarily about a dome. Now, it seems to me that rather than depicting a dome, so that was kind of what I was pointing to right there, rather than depicting a dome, the sky plate is intended to represent a mirror image of the land, a symmetrical pair. The overall symmetrical shape of this conception, and in particular the parallel between humanity and the rulers above and the rakia, reflects a deeper intuition about the nature of the world.
Okay, wow. So what we just learned is the complex literary structure of Genesis 1 actually reveals the author's worldview of the connection between heaven and earth. Let's just pause and let that marinate. The Bible is so dope, and I am so glad to be learning these amazing truths along the way with you guys. If you haven't yet, please take a second to subscribe. If this content is speaking to you, like it, smash that like button, share it out. Thank you for being a part of sharing this good news with us. So we're going to be moving on to the portion that I like to call the rakia redefine. When we hear the word rakia, we think sky dome. But Teeter reveals that a more proper interpretation would actually be sky plate. It's widely accepted that the ancient authors had a view of their cosmos in a three-tiered cosmos, a three-tiered view of their structure of the world. And as Teeter showed, all of our modern renderings of this include some type of spherical shape to it. Teeter argues that we are bad tourists and are naturally falsely rendering the Israelites' three-tiered cosmos into this spherical shape, rather than the flat planes separated by visible and invisible plates. So that's really interesting, but the main point here is to see the interconnectedness between the two realms and how the literary structure of Genesis 1 actually maps on to the actual worldview and structure of the Hebrew authors and audience. With this distinction in mind, we move on to the unseen realm and the connection to Dr. Michael Heiser. Teeter will show how the literary structure of Genesis 1 actually supports the work and teachings of Dr. Michael Heiser and the Divine Council worldview.
That there is a deep correspondence between the celestial and the terrestrial realms, the seen and the unseen, between the hosts of heaven and the hosts of earth. And this correspondence points to, hints at, begins to disclose the multifaceted realities of what Michael Heiser would often refer to as the Divine Council worldview. Now, given this relationship, it should come as no surprise that the sons of God, often elsewhere a designation for celestial beings, members of the Divine Council, fall in a like manner to humanity in Genesis 6, or that, conversely, the king of Babylon can be lamented as the, quote, morning star, Lucifer, the son of the dawn, who has fallen from heaven in Isaiah 14, or the king of Tyre can be likened to a guardian cherub in Eden, the garden of God, both alike in their cosmic fall. The same correspondence underpins the notion of celestial patronage from its classic articulation in Deuteronomy 32, where the nations are divided, quote, according to the number of the sons of God, to the book of Daniel, where Yahweh's angel battles the prince of Persia and anticipates the coming of the prince of Greece, and with many other reflexes throughout Genesis through 2 Kings, especially regarding mysterious encounters with angelic beings on borderlines. Perhaps we'll hear something about that in the next paper. Or not, I don't know. It lies behind the judgment of the gods of Egypt and the plagues of the Exodus, now a 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 1 cycle that patently inverts Genesis 1, ending in the 9th with Yehi Choshech, let there be dark, instead of let there be light. And it also anticipates the significance of the Anakim, the giants, in the conquest of the land, as well as the continuation of that theme in Samuel through Goliath and then through the defeat of the various giants of David's mighty men, and so forth. Indeed, the relationship between the sons of God, the celestial hosts, and humanity is a recurrent one throughout the Hebrew Bible. From the descendants of Abram, the third Adam, who are promised to be like the stars in the heavens in number, to Jacob's vision of a stepped ladder reaching from heaven to earth on which the angels of God are going up and down, and where his descendants are promised to be like the dust of the earth, to Joseph's dream of 11 stars, the moon, and the sun all bowing down to him, all the way down to, and so on, all the way down to the final verses of the book of Daniel, where at the end of days, ba'acharit hayamim, those who have insight are going to arise from the dust of the earth and, quote, shine like the brightness of the rakia. And those who justify the many are going to be like the stars forever and ever. This is the conceptual world of Psalm 82 and of Isaiah 24, where we read, in that day the Lord will punish the host of heaven in the heavens, and the kings of the earth upon the earth. And then the moon will be ashamed, and the sun will be abashed. And the Lord of hosts is going to reign on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, and his presence will be revealed to the elders. All of this is not even to mention the fascinating and extraordinarily robust legacy of these ideas in Second Temple Judaism, in Qumran, and in the New Testament. This intuition, for example, clearly underlies Jesus' instruction to pray for the coming of God's kingdom on earth as in heaven.
Okay, first and foremost, I love how Teeter connects the supernatural focus of the Hebrew scriptures with Second Temple Judaism. In our last video, going over the debate between Dr. Michael Heiser and Dr. John Walton, we saw how John Walton connected these two and said that within the Hebrew scriptures, there was really no concept of this spiritual conflict. Obviously, we can see even in the literary structure of the Hebrew scriptures, there is a connection to the supernatural world of the writings of Second Temple Judaism. Heiser was all over this section as Teeter showed the literary structure of the connections of the heavens and earth is the foundation for the rest of the Hebrew biblical narrative. So we see in Genesis 3 where the humans follow the serpent and want to be like the gods, and immediately following the sky rulers of the sons of God in Genesis 6 coming down to commingle with the daughters of men. Teeter rightly argues that this literary structure of the set of connected domains of heaven and earth in Genesis 1 is the setup for the three divine rebellions that we find immediately following that in the book of Genesis. Let's continue on with the closing remarks from Teeter as he shows that the ancient biblical world and its completeness included both heaven and earth.
Here we're dealing with stereometric thought, to borrow yet another choice phrase from Benno Landsberger, which generates a totality with a double accent, a whole that is more than the mere sum of the parts. In fact, a world that comes into being and continues to exist in the tension between two dipoles and their interaction, a coincidence of opposites. The world in its completeness is understood as heaven and earth, and the seen and the unseen. Humanity is male and female. Time is day and night, common time and sacred festival, reshit and acharit. Life is productive creation and rest, dynamism and stasis. Creation itself is unity and diversity, sameness and difference, a hierarchy of flourishing with rulers and ruled on every recursive level. And related to this, one must note the special role that language plays in historical anthropology generally and in reconstructing a worldview in particular. For Genesis 1, especially important here is what some would classify under the rubric of scribal epistemology or onomastic epistemology. That's the relationship between similar words and letters, their actual shape and sounds and paradigmatic relations relative to one another that are here taken to reveal meaningful knowledge about the actual world itself. Relationship between words and shapes of letters. What does Asav, plants, have to do with Sheva, 7? What does ruling, Lamem Shelet, have to do with image bearing, B'Tselem? What does the sky plate, the Rakia, have to do with the land? This, too, is another aspect of the symmetrical or stereometric thought pervading not only the construction of lines within biblical poetry, thought rhymes, if you will, but the entire worldview and way of thinking that produced parallelism in the first place. So in brief then, attending to the multiple structural patterns and linguistic correspondences within Genesis 1 allows one to recognize the complex and subtle ways that the verbal shape of this text is designed to engender and to embody a worldview. Indeed, the world seen in Genesis 1 is itself a contemplative matrix for thinking about the nature of reality, of time, of the relationship between what's above and what's below, what's before and what's after, and especially in its position at the beginning and head of all. It prepares one to contemplate the predictive rhythms of history and the mystery of time and the divine plan for the ages that will follow. The world, that is, both seen and unseen. Thank you.
Wow. What a brilliant mind and talk. Again, I love how he said in the biblical mind, the world in its completeness included heaven and earth. This talk was incredible and truly displays the beauty and genius of the literary structures of the Hebrew Bible, but especially Genesis 1. I learned so much, but especially how this literary structure, the relationship of words, and even the shapes of letters can convey truth for the ancient biblical authors. It shows the importance of scholarship and being connected with the right scholars. And that's what we're going to do here at this channel, is try to keep you connected with the right scholars so that we can all learn and grow together about the good news that we have to share about what Jesus has done for our world. This teaching shows something very important that we teach here at this channel, and that is that the beginning is near. As we approach the entire narrative of Scripture, we can rest assured that the rhythm and tone of Genesis 1 in the garden is set throughout the entire narrative of Scripture. The beginning truly is near. As we look into Scripture, we can know it's always close. It's also important to know that the beginning is near so that we start our reading and literary understanding of the Bible in Genesis. How many books do you go to where you start at the middle or towards the end? No, you start at the beginning. And same thing with our theology and understanding the flow of what God's doing in this world. We want to start at the beginning. Now, as we close with some awesome question and response from some of the crowd with Teeter at this amazing Hebrew Bible conference, I'm also going to include a small snippet from Ray Lubeck, the former professor that this whole entire Hebrew Bible conference was held in honor of. You're going to love it, and I want you to stay tuned. We're going to have more of these series coming out. Like I said, we have a talk from Tim Mackie, talk from Carmen Imes, talk from Ray himself. We're going to have a lot coming out regarding this Hebrew Bible conference. It was amazing. I want to share it with you guys. I think you're going to learn a lot from it, and let's close with these awesome clips.
We have a question that has a number of likes here. What is the significance of man being made in the image of God, given these connections between humanity and celestial beings?
Both of whom, as I tried to emphasize, both the celestial and the terrestrial rulers are both created beings that do what God does. So again, what we're talking about here is an incredibly fruitful way of constructing thought and thought patterns. That is what parallelism is really all about. And you see this in the best works on Hebrew poetry. But it can really encapsulate an entire treatise. The relationship between what's above and what's below. There's many things that could be included in this, and all the discussions of the image of God and what it means captures some of this. The point is that it creates this dynamic space in between two ideas that is much more productive than simply stating the thing. So it's a fruitful way of constructing a world. All I can say here is that I'm not exaggerating when I say that you cannot overemphasize the importance of these structures and shapes for the overall conception, the governing conception that runs throughout this entire literature and the kind of culture that produces it. So again, it would be a totally different paper, but one that one can analyze this in innumerable ways within the Hebrew Bible. The temple, Mount Sinai itself, the offerings themselves, all of these. It's recursive. It goes all the way around the world. And this is the important point. What these literary devices do is they teach you a way of looking at the world, and the way of looking at the world itself teaches you theology. It's a way of seeing. So that's what we're talking about. And that's actually what I learned from Ray in this, the relationship between structure and thought. So thank you.
I've kind of grafted out in this way what I feel is a flawed hermeneutical model. And that is many scholars, or many people at the popular level, are enamored with the ancient thinking about the world. The ancient Near East, the Greco-Roman world, the Second Temple Judaism. There's that world back there. And we have our modern, advanced world up here. It's advanced, it's modern, we have a much better understanding. Look at our globe compared to that pictorial map of the world back then. And in between, we have the bridge point, the Bible. And I think that the way many people understand this whole scheme is that the Bible actually, especially the Old Testament, represented an advance over ancient Near Eastern cultures. At a popular level, I think that this is a starting point. The Old Testament is better than the pagan world. The New Testament shows progress over the Old Testament. And then here we are today. And we're standing at a higher vantage point epistemologically than any of our forebears, and actually in a critical stance over Scripture. Well, bless their hearts, they meant well, but the best they knew about the smallest seed was a mustard seed. Of course, we know way better than that now. And so it's almost as if our rationality can trump what the Bible has to say. Redeemed imagination looks at the Bible as the only real world. It describes the Bible as it describes life as it really is. No whitewash, no makeup, no Photoshop pictures. It is a world of beauty, tragically vandalized by miscreants. Our job as kingdom builders is to imagine once again the world that God has made, in which he could pronounce it is very good.
At the end of the road, the big payoff, again, for paying attention to the heavenly host is that if we have what I call the divine council worldview in our heads, we will come to realize when we get to the book of Revelation, and even earlier chapters like Hebrews chapter 12, Hebrews chapter 2, that human believers, the human family of God, actually forms the reconstituted, made new counsel of God. When we think about glorification, the evangelicals like to use the word glorification. Other traditions use the word theosis or exaltation or something like that. Human believers in their final state are made like Jesus, yes, but we become fit for sacred space in the most ultimate sort of way. We, as human beings, created lesser than the Elohim, Psalm 8. Hebrews has lesser than the angels, lower than the angels. We are actually elevated to that position to occupy that status rank and form a newly constituted council for God, council with God, to enjoy creation and to manage it, do whatever God wants done in the final state. God gets his way with a restored Eden, and we are his glorified family, along with the members of the heavenly host who remain loyal to him. So we have a functional sort of corporate family partnership model going on here. And at the end of days, that's what we are, and that's our status.
They sing a new song which goes like this. You are worthy to take the scroll. You are worthy to open its seals. For you were slaughtered, and with your own blood you purchased a people for God, from every tribe and tongue, from every people and nation, and made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they will reign on the earth. This wonderful song, which comes in Revelation chapter 5, is an advanced statement of the promise which Revelation holds out for the new heavens and new earth, with renewed humans taking their place within it. So often we in the church have imagined that if we are praising God for what he's done in Jesus, if we are praising Jesus himself for his death on the cross, this is because he's done what he's done so that we can go to heaven. And there, as some hymns say, we will just rest forever. Well, in a sense, yes, it is a time of rest, because it will be rest from the struggle which we still have with sin and suffering in this world. But it's much more interesting than that, much more human than that. What we are promised is that those who are rescued from sin and death will then become a kingdom and priests to God, and will reign on the earth. Not reign in heaven, but reign on the earth. When the new heavens and new earth come together, then, though it's hard for us to imagine this, partly because our Christian traditions haven't reflected very much on this, then there will be tasks to perform in God's new world.
Here's what's happening on page 1 then. God, the God of the Bible, wants to share his universe with other creatures. That's the depiction.
Mm-hmm.
And he wants to share it in such a way that his rule and authority over it is mediated by these delegated creatures.
And that's the key idea.
Celestial
and
terrestrial.
terrestrial.
Right. Spiritual beings.
Let's call it that for now, and human beings.
And human beings. So that what creation becomes is a symphony of unified wills who submit to each other in love. If we want to get Trinitarian about it, which is where it's all going.
Wow. How incredible is this? I hope you guys are enjoying this, and I hope you're learning a lot. I want to ask you for a second to subscribe. If you're enjoying the content, share it, press that like button, slap it. Help this channel grow. Help the message of the good news of what Jesus has done for this world get out. You're a part of this community with me. I always say we, and really it's just me behind the camera. But I've got you guys as support, encouragement, and you're here for the ride, and I'm so grateful for you. So thank you for subscribing, thank you for liking, thank you for sharing the content, and thank you for being a part of this journey with me. Let's get back to ringing them bells.